Please turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 14, please, as we continue our study in the book of 1 Corinthians. Again, the book is divided fairly naturally into sections depending on the different problems that Paul is discussing in the church in Corinth. Chapters 11 through 14 talk about the problems in their assemblies, and in particular chapters 12 through 14, the problems regarding spiritual gifts. Chapter 12, he compares the spiritual body of the church to a physical body, that the different parts of the body should care for one another and work together. In chapter 13, talked about the spiritual gifts were temporary, and they would cease, but love is greater than those gifts. And then in chapter 14, where we are, he's talking about how they should use the gifts to edify and avoid confusion and strife. So in particular, chapter 14 begins comparing tongues and prophecy. The gift of tongues, the ability to speak a language that a person had not studied, but as being used at Corinth, nobody knew the language. They were speaking a language, but nobody knew the language, and so there's confusion and lack of understanding resulting. But prophecy spoke a message that people could understand, so prophecy was greater in the assemblies unless the tongue was interpreted. The next section that we studied talked about how that the gift should be used to edify and build up the church. And if a tongue speaker could benefit the congregation if he would pray for the ability to interpret, but all worship should be done in spirit and understanding, he says. And in the next section, where we were last time, talked about the importance of learning to be mature in understanding, but in malice to be like babies. And so we talked about the comparison of at least some length last time, and that's where we were at the end of class, at the end of chapter 14, verse 21. Questions or comments before we continue with verse 22? Okay, let's go ahead and read some then. Let's read 22 through 28. We'll go 22 through 28 and see if we can finish more than that tonight. Let's see that. We'd like to read chapter 14, verse 22 through 28. Chapter 14, verse 22 through 28. Bill, please.
Therefore, tongues are for a sign, not to those who believe, but to unbelievers. But prophesying is not for unbelievers, but for those who believe. Therefore, if the whole church comes together in one place, and all speak with tongues, and there comes in those who are uninformed, or unbelievers, will then not say, but you are out of your mind. But if all prophesying and an unbeliever or an uninformed person comes in, he is convicted by all. He is convicted by all. And thus the secrets of his heart are revealed, and so falling down on his face he will worship God and report that God is truly among you. How is it then, brethren, whenever you come together, each of you has a song, has a teaching, has a tongue, has a revelation, has an interpretation? Let all things be done for edification.
A couple more, Bill, please. Through 28, please.
If anyone speaks in a tongue, let there be two, or at the most three, each in turn, and let one interpret. But if there is no interpreter, let him keep silent in church, and let him speak to himself and to God.
Okay, so question, verse 22, we have questions number 24 and 25 already go together. It talks about the tongues were assigned to one group of people, and prophesying was especially benefit to other people. So what's the contrast he makes in verse 22 between those who benefit from tongues and those who benefit from prophecy? Karen?
Tongues are for those who are unbelievers, but prophecy is for the believers.
Okay. Now that may seem confusing at first, because in the next verses he's going to talk about how that unbelievers may be confused by the tongues and benefited by the prophecy. And in cases that if there's interpretation, that the believers can benefit from the prophecy, from the tongues. So how do you explain, or what is your comments on what he means when he says that the tongues are for the unbelievers and prophecy benefits the believers? Comments, thoughts, questions 24 and 25? Frank?
Well, for the unbelievers, the hearing of people speaking in foreign languages was proof to them. It was a sign, a miracle to them that God was with them in performing the speaking in foreign languages.
Okay. So verse 22, I believe, is talking about the way the tongues were intended to be for. They are for a sign. That's the intent. That's not the way it was being done at Corinth. That's the way it was supposed to be done. It would be a sign if, as in Acts chapter 2, people who hadn't studied languages could speak languages, foreign languages, but if you knew the language and you could hear what they were saying and you knew they were speaking a message in language that they hadn't studied, it would be a sign to you. Okay? Helpful to me is the fact that these are not but expressions. He's not denying that tongues can have a benefit to believers. He's not denying that prophecy can have a benefit to unbelievers. He's talking about its emphasis, as many not but expressions are with emphasis. The first item, he's not denying it completely, he's just emphasizing the second one. So when he says tongues are not for those who believe but to unbelievers, he doesn't mean that's no benefit to believers, but primarily it would benefit an unbeliever who would see somebody talking in his own language, knowing that they didn't know the language. It would be a proof to them that the person speaking was from God. But if you were a believer, you didn't need that. You already had faith. And so prophecy would benefit you. But it's not saying that tongues would be wrong or not benefit you at all, but the prophecy would benefit you more. That's what I believe he's trying to say, and he'll go in the next verses and show how that there can be some benefit the other way around. Other thoughts on 22? That's kind of confused me in the past. Hopefully what I just said may help you. Other comments? So it goes on then in 23, and question number 26 and 27 again go together. What happens when a visitor comes? Verse 22 talks about the way the tongues should be, but in Corinth, if the whole church is together in one place, what happens if somebody comes in and listens to everybody talking in tongues? Unbelievers come in, and here's everybody talking in tongues the way it is in Corinth. What would happen? Rick?
They couldn't make sense out of it. They'd either think they were drunk or they was lunatics.
Okay. There would be confusion. Back to the problem of not understanding, but more emphasis on confusion, because here are all these languages being spoken in. In this case, you're uninformed. That is, you don't know the language. You're uninformed. You don't know the language. They're speaking in the language, and different people, maybe speaking in, we'll talk about the confusion in just a few moments. You're going to say, well, these people have lost their minds. What are they trying to do? Okay. Other comments on 23? Okay. Oh, Karen?
Well, it clearly implies that even an unbeliever expects some kind of order in a worship assembly. He's come there to worship God or to find out about this God, and instead he walks in and this one and this one and this one and this one are all speaking different languages at the same time, and so he says, what is this? Are they out of their minds? So
Okay. Other comments? Okay, now just a couple more observations. Notice he begins in the verse talking about the whole church comes together in one place. We mentioned that before. As we go through the chapter, we'll talk about it some more, and we'll discuss it specifically as it applies to the women speaking in the end of the chapter. But he's talking about a situation where the whole church is assembled, an assembly of the whole congregation. And here you come in, as Karen just said, and here's all these different people talking in these languages, and you don't know them, you're uninformed. It doesn't make sense to you. But aside from the situation in Corinth, how would this apply to people today who claim to speak in tongues? Those who today claim the ability to speak in tongues, how would this apply to them? Rick?
Well, if they're speaking in a tongue that nobody can understand, then they're false prophets because it's not doing anybody any good. We don't know what you're telling us. We don't know what you're preaching to us.
Okay. The tongues they speak today are never real languages. They're gibberish, nonsense. There's never any real message there at all today. So inevitably, people are going to wonder what's going on. And exactly what he describes here is exactly what happens, at least in many of the assemblies of groups that believe in tongues today. A lot of times there are different people at the same time, just like he describes here, talking different gibberish. And people come in and it doesn't make a bit of sense to you. Exactly like he talks about here. The same problems that we see discussed in this chapter in Corinth exist today for those who think they have tongues but don't even have languages, real languages. They just have something that they have been hoodwinked into believing. Okay, other comments on 23 and the applications that we can make. Okay, so notice in this case, for the unbeliever, the prophecy would actually be better for them in the case where they don't understand what's being said. The acts of the prophecy would benefit them more. Verse 24, if it's prophesying, that is, it would be in the language that people could understand. They come in and they're unbelievers, but they're benefited by it. They're convinced and judged by it. In contrast to the confusion, if they're speaking in tongues, people are speaking in tongues that the visitors don't know. All right? What effect will it have on him in verse 25? If that's true, he's speaking now the prophecy which he said in verse 22 is primarily for the believer, but if the visitor knows the language being spoken, and they prophesy, what benefit does that have to him? In the last part of 24 and into verse 25. What benefit does he receive? Rick?
They can hear and understand and believe.
Okay, they understand. They are convicted. The secrets of his hearts are revealed. He's shown his errors, the things about his life that need to be corrected. And he'll fall down and worship God and say that God is truly there. Rather than saying that you're crazy, he's going to see that God is really benefiting, really working it through them. And so the tongues, the way they're being used in Corinth, didn't accomplish the purpose for which they should have been used. And the end result was not just for the members, but for visitors to confuse them as well. Okay, other comments through 25? Daryl.
I'm not sure if I understood you well.
Okay.
Did you indicate that in 24 and 25 it's prophecy and tongues together?
No, in 24-25, he's talking about prophesying. He says in first part of 24, if all prophesy, an unbeliever uninformed comes in, he's convinced of all and so on.
And it's interesting in 25 what the nature of the prophetic statements are. Evidently, Paul is considering that someone might speak about unknown things about this visitor. You know, you don't know this visitor, but suddenly you're able to say things that only that visitor himself would know about himself. As he says in verse 25, the secrets of his heart to worship God, declaring that God must be among you. And an example of that, although Jesus, I don't know if it's an exact parallel, but Jesus revealed the secrets of the Samaritan woman, of her heart, that she had several husbands, and what she had now wasn't really hers. And it seems that Paul is saying that those kind of revelations by the gift of prophecy are made about a visitor's own life.
Okay. Other comments? All right, so we go to 26 then, and he lists some kinds of things that they do in their assemblies. Let me see where I am. It seems to me at 26 there's a little bit of a change of direction, not much, but down through 25, he's been talking about the problem of people not being able to understand, or the importance of understanding, and people not being able to understand because of the tongues are not being used properly. But in 26, beginning, it seems to me that he's talking more emphasis on the problem of confusion. Of course, that happens from a lack of understanding, but he's going to discuss some things we've touched on before, that they are causing confusion and disorder. And he's going to talk about what they need to do to correct that, I believe, in the following verses. Any other comments through 25? Okay. So in 26 then, we have question number 28. What are some things he talks about that they would do in their assembly? What are some things they would do in their assembly in 26? Neil?
Teach. One would speak in a tongue, there would be an interpreter. One would be prophesying and singing.
Okay. And all of those are things we've talked about. The tongues, the interpretation, the revelation, the teaching, and the singing. All those things we've talked about. So he says, when you come together, each of you has some of these things you want to do. Or that's what I get out of it. What is his point in the verse? All these different things you want to do, what's his point? Karen?
Well, it seems to me he's saying they're all doing them at the same time.
Well, we certainly will talk about that in the next few verses. What should they be doing? Last part of 26. Rick?
They're first up said that they come together. Whenever you come together, each of you have a song in your heart. So they come together in the right spirit.
Perhaps, could be. But again, what are they supposed to do? Last part of the verse, what are they supposed to do? Neil?
It's for the edification of each one.
Okay. So when they come, one person might want to have a psalm that he wants the group to sing. One might have a teaching he wants to present. One wants to speak in a tongue. And so that's not necessarily wrong of itself, as long as they do it to edify. Back to the point, the benefit of the group. Not to exalt yourself, and not certainly to cause confusion and disorder, but to benefit the group, to edify the group. Edify means what? Edification is what?
Building up.
Building up. Okay? Spiritually. So everything done in the assembly is to be done to benefit and build up and strengthen and encourage the group. Everybody who's there. That's everything. And that, to me, that's a critical statement. Everybody, everything that's done should be done to edify, to build up the group. Not to exalt yourself, not to please yourself. We're not here to honor ourselves. We're not here to prove that we're better than other people. We're here to help one another to serve the Lord. Okay? Comments, discussion on 26 and the purpose that he says we're here for. That's question number 29, really. Okay? So I ask you for some applications then, 30, excuse me. What are some applications of what he's talking about? What principles should be, if everything we do in our assembly should edify, what are some things that we should remember or apply? Frank?
Well, we have to be thinking of the needs of others to edify one another, not just for personal glorification.
Okay. So first of all, you think about what's good for other people, not what pleases you and glorifies you. Okay? What else? Any other applications? Remember, everything we do, everything should be done to edify. Rick?
Everything should be done in order.
Okay, in an orderly way. Not in a confusing way, but in a way that's manifest order, which they were not doing. He's going to give some examples of applications of what they should do and make sure it's orderly. He's going to discuss that in the following verses, ending, of course, in verse 40 with let all things be done decently and in order. Okay, so the conduct should be orderly so that we can be benefited. We can edify one another rather than the confusion. Okay? Other specifics. If we're going to do everything for edification, what are some other specifics? Other applications? Karen?
Well, I would say, I know some denominations have bands that play during their worship assembly, and you've got the drummers and the person playing the guitar and things. But in and of itself, those instruments do not teach you anything. When we sing to each other, we're singing the words of worship to God, to each other and to God.
Okay, so I believe that music is one area where it definitely applies. The singing, it honors God. We sing with make melody in our hearts to the Lord, Ephesians 5. We're also teaching and admonishing one another. We should be edifying one another with our songs. But the application to instrumental music, does an instrument edify? Does it teach anything? People may like to hear it, but what's it teaching? What is it edifying? It's not. Karen and I have been going to physical therapy, and they played different music during the sessions. Sometimes they play country, and half the time you can't understand the words. Sometimes they play rock, and half the time you can't understand the words. And sometimes they play religious music, and half the time you can't understand the words. Not to say that they're all necessarily equivalent, but it's the same problem. This music that we sing should be singing, and we should try to do it in a way to edify and admonish one another, with everybody understanding the words and the message that's being spoken and so on. Okay, so that's an application area. Other applications that everything should be done edifying. Rick?
David, singing is a lot like praying. You're in communication with your heart and with God when you're singing these hymns, that you're truly appreciating the words that you're singing. And it's the same with prayer. You should be disciplined in your prayer, that you're praying to God and not making loud accusations or praying for things that you shouldn't be praying for.
Okay. All right. Other comments? Let me make some questions, some applications that I would like for us to consider. What edification is there if you're asleep? If you're dozing? Are you being edified? Are you edifying somebody else? That, to me, this is a clear instruction that shows we need to stay awake. Pay attention. Keep your mind on what's being done rather than daydreaming or sleeping or dozing. My dad is a good man in a lot of ways, but almost invariably, it didn't matter who the preacher was, 5 minutes in the sermon, my dad's eyes would be closed. So guess what I grew up doing? The preaching would start, pretty soon my eyes would close too, like my dad. I eventually learned that that's not the way to do things. And actually, he was listening. I was too. But the example is terrible, and you don't learn nearly as much with your eyes closed as you do with your eyes open. Let all things be done for edification. If the goal is for edification, pay attention. Listen. Jesus often said that he who has ears, let him hear. Pay attention if you're going to be edified. To me, that's an application of the principle we're talking about. Okay, comments? Other comments? Frank?
One of the other applications of what Paul is saying is that when one is speaking in a foreign language, that there must be someone to interpret what the Spirit had given them to say, and they must not be speaking all at the same time and causing confusion, but take turns in speaking in an orderly fashion.
Okay, he's going to make that application, so we'll get into those verses in just a minute. I have one more application before we look at the following verses that make Frank's point. People who could be here on time but habitually come in late. Or some people habitually leave early when they could stay. When they could be here and be edified, but they make a habit not to be here on time, or they leave, are they being edified when they're not even here? Are they edifying the group when they come in late like that or leave early? To me, that's another application. We need to think about that. If all things should be done for edification, let's do things in an orderly way that helps people to learn and helps us to learn and helps people to grow. Okay, let's move on then. And then the application that Frank made brings us into 27 and 28. And question number 31, he makes the application of let all things be done for edification. And the application in 27 is what then? Question number 31. He's applying the principle to tongues. What's his application? Neil?
If there's a person that can speak tongues, there should, 2's plenty, 3 would be the most individuals, and they're each supposed to speak at a single time, not all together.
Okay. Now, just my thinking that the 2 are the most 3. You have all these different spiritual gifts. If everybody who has a spiritual gift wants to use it every time we're here, it's going to drag things out in a way that ends up not being profitable. So there should be a limit to it. But he says, do it in turn. And let somebody interpret, back to the point of making sure people understand. But not everybody speaking at once, which was often the case, is often the case in so-called tongue speakers today. And obviously the problem in Corinth was different people talking at the same time, talking over one another. So over here somebody speaking in tongues, and then over here somebody else speaking a different tongue, somebody else, different languages, saying different things all at the same time. That is disorderly. It's not edifying. It's confusing. But that's what was going on. And in many cases, just to show off, to show that you had a better gift than the next guy. Okay? So Paul's solution to it is speak, basically would say one by one. This one speaks, then when they're done, that next one speaks. When they're done, the next one speaks. So everybody can benefit from it, but they have to be interpreted in order for the people to benefit, to be edified. Okay? Other comments on 27? Rick?
It says, let the others judge.
Okay, we'll get there in just a minute. I think that's question number 34. Give me a minute there, Rick. We'll get there. 28. What if there is no interpreter? What's the application in 28? Bill?
He needs to speak to himself and to God.
Okay. So if there's no interpreter, you don't use the tongue at all in church. You keep silent, you hush. Why? Because you're not edifying anybody. Nobody knows the language. There's no interpreter. Nobody can tell you what the language is meaning. And so the end result is confusion and disorder. So don't use the language, even if you have that gift, which nobody has it today, but even then when they did have it, keep silent because nobody's benefiting from it. Okay? Other comments? Okay, now some observations that I'd like to point out. What does he say they can do? They're not to do this in church, but what can they do? Last part of the verse. Frank?
Speak to himself and to God.
Okay, he can speak to himself and to God, but not in the assembly. Okay? So, apparently, there was some benefit that the speaker would get for himself, but the church would not get the benefit, so he keeps silent in the church, but he can do it by himself, with just him and God. So notice the distinction between the assembly and outside the assembly. Some things outside the assembly are allowed that are not allowed in the assembly. Okay? Other comments to 28. All right, we need to read a few more verses then. It makes application of the prophets beginning 29. Let's just read through 31. Who can read 29 through 31 for us, please? 29 through 31. Neil?
Let 2 or 3 prophets speak, and let the others judge. But if anything is revealed to another who sits by, let the first keep silent. For you can all prophesy one by one, that all may learn and all be encouraged.
Okay. So he made some instructions regarding the tongue speakers in 27 to help things be orderly and edifying. What's the application out of the prophets in 29 and 30? What's the application to prophets? Right?
He says to just let 2 or 3 prophets speak and let the others judge. And of course, he's talking about in turn so that there isn't the confusion of all speaking at the same time. Okay.
So as with the prophets, so it was with the tongue speakers. They limit the number, but if anything as well, 31, if it all can prophesy one by one, that all may learn and be encouraged. Again, the edifying, the learning, the encouragement, that's the goal. So they speak one at a time. Not everybody are different people confusing with different things being spoken at the same time. They speak in turn. And what happens if one's speaking and somebody else has something that's revealed to them to say? What happens then in verse 30? Karen?
The first one is to keep silent.
Okay. So you see the point, one at a time. Not 2 different people at the same time, one by one. So that there's edification and encouragement that people can learn. Okay? So again, he's just defining what it takes to be orderly. Obviously, at least to me it's obvious that in Corinth that they weren't doing this. It was a big mess of different people talking, some people prophesying, some people speaking in tongues, all at the same time, very confusing. And, back to 1 Corinthians 11, in the middle of all this mess, some people want to take the Lord's Supper. Not waiting for other people, but I'm going to go ahead and have the Lord's Supper. All this is going on at the same time, confusion, disorder, and Paul's saying, okay, in essence, everybody should focus on the same thing, one activity at a time. Everybody pay attention to the same thing till you're ready to go on to the next thing. And so on, to be orderly. Okay? Now back to Rick's question that I postponed. Last part of 29. What does he mean by let the others judge? And that's question number 34. What do you mean by let the others judge? Frank?
According to, in this verse, according to Vine's expository dictionary, judges is translated, it means discern.
Okay. Discern? Discern? What else? Daryl?
I'm not certain about this, but I would assume that what Paul has in mind is one of the gifts that's listed in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, as he introduces this whole topic, that one of the gifts was the distinguishing of spirits.
Okay.
That, someone has the floor, he presents what he says is a statement of prophecy, a message given to him by God to give to the others. And, well, was that really a message from God? Was that something he made up? Well, another brother has the gift to judge, to discern. Was that really the Spirit of God?
Okay. So that's one obvious way, it seems to me, that people would be judging, that some had that gift, that they would discern what was being said as being from God or not. Not having spiritual gifts today, how would we judge what's being taught? Rick?
That's what was sort of on my mind is if we hear a preacher up there preaching, we have to discern whether he's telling us the truth from out of the Bible or not.
Okay.
And we better pay attention to that.
Okay, so the way we would do it is we have the completed scriptures. They didn't have that. That's why they needed these gifts. The gift of tongue speaking and prophecy and interpretation and discernment. They needed those gifts. We have the scriptures to do all those things for us today. So we discern or judge today as we listen to what someone is teaching a class or preaching, whatever they teach. Or we're discerning what the students in the class are saying, whether or not it's what agrees with the scripture or not. The discernment is based on the Word of God. The scriptures provide us to every good work. And so 1 John 4, verse 1 talks about that we judge the prophets today, those who claim to be prophets or those who are teachers, by the Word, by comparing them to what's in the scriptures. Okay. Questions, comments through 31? Okay. So what you've got now is, I hope, a better overview of the problem in Corinth, of not just confusion from lack of understanding because of the tongues, but also a lack of order because of so many different things going on at the same time. The lesson for you and me is we should make sure what we do in the assembly, it's not just the speakers who are responsible. We all have a responsibility to make sure that everything is done for edification, to edify and build up and strengthen and encourage one another, and we do it in an orderly way. Each activity, we focus on that one till we're done with that. We go to the next one and we focus on that till we're done with it. Orderly, edifying instruction and worship. Anything else through 31? Okay, thank you. We'll start with 32 then next time. Thank you.